I feel sorry for you. You're expecting Barbara Ehrenreich and you're getting me. But anyway, I'm so pleased to be here. And the subtitle of my talk could be How the Homelessness Group Became the Employment Group, or better yet, It's All Connected. So after 20 years of building housing for the homeless, my colleagues and I stepped back a few years ago and asked ourselves, what is the end game here? And how do we think about preventing homelessness from happening in the first place? And so we started looking at and mapping data on everything we knew contributed to homelessness. And we discovered something pretty stunning. No matter what the area of risk was, and this happens to be a heat map of prison admissions and the address of origin of people in the New York State prison system. No matter what we looked at, foster care data, employment data, health data, we were not just looking at the same neighborhoods, we were looking at the same census tracts. And so we realized we basically needed to think in spatial terms about how we could possibly begin constructing a different way of responding to homelessness. And so we went to the brightest red dot in this map in the sort of far northeast corner of Brooklyn. And this is what we found. Those are census tracts that contain the highest concentration of public housing, not only in New York City, but in the country. And so it's a neighborhood called Brownsville with about 88,000 residents, and it's been poor for a long time. And my colleagues and I just started with organizing, talking to residents about what they thought needed to get attention and focus and where they needed to support to change things. And we heard the same four things over and over again: housing conditions, opportunities for youth, the impact of crime and safety and how every family was entangled in the criminal justice system in some way, and jobs. And so early on, I think we intuited that this direction that LIF and City and others have so well articulated of the quarterback, we intuited that something like this was needed. So we started as sort of a pre-quarterback, maybe an informal quarterback, and just pulling together residents who were eager to work towards something new, city agencies who were working in the neighborhood but usually not in any kind of organized or collaborative way, and other not-for-profits who were really doing terrific work around the city in these areas that residents had said were the ones where the gaps were the greatest. And we had great success in pulling in amazing partners to work in Brownsville with us in every area but one, which was jobs. It was the hardest and the slowest task to find employment partners of any type to come work with us in Brownsville. But it became clearer and clearer as our work evolved that gap blocked progress everywhere else. And as we analyzed the data on jobs in Brownsville, we saw that Brownsville residents are basically unemployed at nearly twice the rate of the rest of Brooklyn, and that to bring Brownsville even with national employment rates meant getting another 5,000 working or adults in the neighborhood into the workforce. And so we needed to get started in a new way. The conventional partners just were wary of Brownsville. It just seemed a mountain too tall. And so we found support in a pretty unlikely place. And it was in speaking with the City Foundation about we just needed to take this on that they introduced us to the Small Business Services Administration of New York City, the overseers of a $1.4 billion annual spend in terms of workforce services in New York. You know, one might think, and certainly we did at that point, like the ultimate bureaucracy. And lo and behold, they were asking themselves the same questions. How did this very robust system fail consistently to reach Brownsville and the city's other poorest neighborhoods? And so we sat down together and looked at the data on what SBS had and what they knew about the employment patterns and utilization of the traditional systems by Brownsville residents. And what we found really opened our eyes in a very optimistic way, because over 5,000 residents of Brownsville had been in a Workforce One center the previous year. Now, only 1 in 6 had gotten a job, and 1 in 4 was a citywide average. And so we were looking at data that showed we didn't have a motivational issue in Brownsville, and we possibly didn't have a resource issue, but we certainly had a systems design issue if that robust system wasn't reaching the people in New York City who needed it the most. So my talk is really about how we've gotten underway with a major jobs campaign, because we're still very much in the launch phase. And it's a story of how we're prototyping new ways to create an effective job system in this neighborhood, using what's evolved to be a 5-step innovation process. Now, if you step outside human services, there is nothing exotic at all about the idea of prototyping, but it's really not an approach that we've typically used. You know, Google wouldn't launch a new product, for instance, without making sure there was a market for it, testing it with consumers, evolving it, getting the bugs out. And so our way of leaning into this particular challenge in Brownsville is really taking the same approach. We've used it in homelessness to affect the housing, many people using city's existing resources. And we think it has great promise in Brownsville and in the workforce development space based on the work we've seen thus far. So let me tell you a bit about how we've gone about this. We think that the first challenge is to set a big, measurable, time-bound goal that will force people to act in new ways. And in Brownsville, you know, the gap of 5,000 jobs between what it would take from where we are now to get to a normative state that matched national averages, well, it certainly seemed big, hairy, and audacious, but it's so clearly the right goal. You know, but we would want less for Brownsville than to have, you know, the same rates of employment as any other community. And so we set on the goal of 5,000 jobs and a 3-year time horizon. Next, we realized we needed to build a much more diverse team than any we had assembled before. And so with the committed leadership of the Small Business Services Administration and other city agencies, including the Housing Authority, the police, we have employers involved, other workforce agencies that were in this context really intrigued and eager to work with us in Brownsville. Our own team, other not-for-profits doing very different things in the neighborhood, but whose clients certainly needed work. And most importantly, you know, residents of as many of the different public housing developments as we could involve. We set about structuring a 100-day prototyping process that involved 3 teams made up of the different mix of players from these different sectors. The next thing we did was, perhaps for the first time, really seriously and as a group, we listened to the user. And as we met with individuals in Brownsville who were long out of the workforce or who had been employed but irregularly, we heard 3 things pretty consistently about their experience with the city's existing workforce system. One was that the distance to the nearest Workforce One centers was really an issue. The closest were in downtown Brooklyn and in Jamaica, Queens. We also heard over and over again that the requirements about how you needed to prepare and what you needed to arrive with were very unclear. And then also we learned that there was not any feedback built into the system. So people would go, have an interview, and would hear nothing, not whether the interview had gone well, what could have gone better, whether their application was still active. And so over and over again, we heard stories that, you know, pretty much, you know, were about typically a young woman with children somehow finding childcare that day to go to a Workforce One center, arriving and being told that she needed to have an updated resume, coming back with an updated resume, again, after all of the, you know, the friction involved in the process of finding childcare and finding a way to get there, and then having an interview and never hearing anything again. And so that pattern of frustration and defeat in the face of really taking some pretty, you know, major steps to try to move into the workforce was so common in Brownsville. Well, we then just got our teams together and started trying our best ideas. And again, we're working in this 100-day cycle, meeting every 30 days to really examine what was working, do more of that, stuff that wasn't working, drop that. And some real heroes emerged, people like Kate Janeski, who's the assistant commissioner for SBS, who was like, if this distance is a problem, maybe we could bring a mobile Workforce One center to Brownsville and bring all of the functionality on a weekly basis to the neighborhood. And then one of our partner agencies from a criminal justice agency was like, if resumes are a barrier, why don't we just take this old fax machine we have and a desk and a laptop and just have a resume workshop and just do all the production here. So everyone we know is going to a Workforce One interview fully prepared. And then my colleagues just went to heroic lengths to do the outreach to residents of the neighborhood to inform them of the fact that this opportunity was available, because there's really no mechanism to outreach to individuals. And midway through, as we were like, knocking on doors, leafleting, meeting with every group in the neighborhood, we learned from SBS that they actually had the phone numbers of some 8,000 members of the Brownsville community who had gone to Workforce One centers over the years. And so this big text messaging campaign began. And so that whole focused innovation and testing things, learning and improving just became the new culture. And then lastly, we, in the aftermath of the 100 days, we are now at a phase of locking in the learnings. And the key learnings, I would say, are as follows. One is that there has to be a one-stop shop, a seamless user experience, that if you arrive looking for work, there's one application, and that we all get behind the effort of getting you through the process. Secondly, we learned loud and clear that what's most appealing and satisfying for Brownsville residents who've been out of the workforce a long time is to have a direct-to-employer contact, not to be sort of intermediated by training programs or assessments to a greater degree than necessary. So we've really shifted our focus now in phase 2 to at least twice monthly employer events where people are doing their hiring and their interviewing on the spot. And then lastly, this whole issue of communication, of opportunities, of reinforcement, of confidence. We expect to have to be driving this for a good long time, but that success will look like in Brownsville the day when neighbors are telling each other about places they can find work, that there's enough saturation of people working that normal networks of job finding are kicking in and working. And so let me give you a little bit on the results and the next steps. In those 100 days, we were able to find work for 76 people, the 5 sectors, food, retail, health, security, and utilities. We are teeing up other prototyping phases for other layers of our jobs campaign in hard and soft skills, entrepreneurship, youth employment, job creation, and then also realizing that this is an important opportunity to append a really robust financial education and services component to the work. And then just to finish in terms of what I think the end game here is and what's possible is that it's not just about 5,000 more people in Brownsville into the workforce, because that's one pathway to a neighborhood that's safer, healthier, and more prosperous, which is our goal in the Brownsville Partnership. But what we see emerging, and we want to nurture and reinforce, is a new set of habits of collaboration and problem solving that can extend well beyond the 5,000 Jobs campaign. So I thank you for the chance to share our work, and happy to take some questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Lee Goldstein. I'm with the City of Washington, D.C. And can you talk a little bit about the housing redevelopment in Brownsville? And I think it's Prospect Plaza, and how the work that you all have done on the ground is so critical. Because I think with all this real estate development, I think it's to the last panel's description about how college is not an end goal, or high school, just like the housing development is not an end goal, that you're investing in the people. And oftentimes these real estate developments take several years. So can you speak on what's happening with Prospect Plaza and the housing, and how your work on the ground jobs is tying in?
Sure. You've touched on an interesting and important theme in Brownsville. The Prospect Plaza development was sort of a failed Hope 6 project that was dormant for about 10 years. It's now in construction. It sort of left kind of a climate of distrust around any efforts to revitalize public housing, because there was such a long gap between when it was vacated and when the rebuilding actually started. We've been involved in that project really in tracking residents who were displaced and had rights to move back. Most of those individuals, the time has been so long, have found other housing. So I guess just to bridge to like what we're doing, our point of contact with everyone we work with in Brownsville now is an invitation to work on the jobs, through the jobs program to really move the economic stability of the community. That said, there are 10 other NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority developments in Brownsville besides Prospect Plaza. All of them need serious retrofitting, and so we've been working with residents to look at what resident concerns are with respect to what changes should be made, what the kind of protections and what they would see essential if there were to be an all-out retrofitting initiative with respect to how to do it in a way that residents would find trustworthy and comfortable. So, does that get to your? Yes, over there. Oh, sure. Okay.
Hi, Jonathan Horowitz. I work on federal policy issues for LIF. And one question, you said that there's the highest concentration of federally subsidized housing in the country there. So presumably a lot of the people you're working with are in subsidized housing, and we know that there can be risks with increasing one's earned income. And if you're in subsidized housing, you can lose it. The incentives are not exactly perfect. Can you talk a little bit about whether that's a concern in the work that you're doing?
Well, that certainly has been, kind of misinformation or confusion or just lack of information about what happens when you go back to work and your income increases and you're a tenant of public housing. That's absolutely part of this communications, drumbeat that I referenced, and thank you for highlighting that particular component. There are ways, and working with NYCHA, and we're thrilled that NYCHA was part of our design team, to actually create incentives using various public housing programs for families to save and to forego the rent, or the rent increase does not have to happen immediately so that families can save. And so we're trying to get a regularized system in place, and so that there aren't any kind of caveats to the message that we give families. But as you heard me describe the sectors where we're finding work now for families, we're aiming to have at least $15 an hour job, but some of those jobs are closer to $10 an hour. It's not at a rate yet where that's going to be an immediate barrier for a family, but families do ask the question, and so having NYCHA and policies aligned with creating that upward mobility is part of the next chapter of tuning up the communications.
Robert Goldman with Montgomery Housing Partnership. What you talked about was exciting stuff. I guess one question would be sort of how you kind of got them all together, these comprehensive approaches. People, they all have their turf, and, who are you coming in telling us we got to work together? And so how you kind of broke that down and got people really working together?
Well, it's always a work in progress, but at the beginning, starting with just basic organizing and talking to people and identifying the local leaders, we worked with some of the local community organizing groups and focused on, as I mentioned earlier, just what are the issues that people wanted to work on and wanted more support around. And so everything that we've done in Brownsville has really kind of been led by what are we hearing from the community. And I'd say we've had an interesting experience with reaching out to partners, though it was slow going with the jobs piece. When we were seeking out groups in New York City who just were the best at what they did on early childhood or on alternatives to incarceration, the best groups were totally up for it and kind of had no ego in it. And it's interesting. It's a real kind of line in the sand. Brownsville in New York means like you're going to work hard because this is a tough place. But the groups who are really excited to come work with us just sort of came with a spirit of generosity, and it's been fairly easy. We have MOUs when we need to, and we're applying for grants in common, but we're really just now at the point of kind of formalizing roles around who's going to take the lead on what. So hasn't been easy, but I think the right people were very game, and we've had very good support from residents. I could tell you stories about like where it hasn't gone well. That's just some of the entrenched leadership has been difficult to kind of keep on board. But we keep trying. Thank you.